All right, we're now on page 424 of the report. Did I miss something? 424 of the report, and I'm going to hand it over to Rita, who's going to take us through the Stormwater Management Framework engagement. So over to you. Nice to see you here.
Thank you. The paper went to a briefing recently, so I'm going to take most of it as read, if I may, just because we had a bit of a discussion last time. So what I'm coming to the committee for is for you to note this is an update on the development of the Stormwater Management Framework and approval to engage with the community on the draft vision, values and outcomes. And you'll notice there was a couple of comments when it went to briefing. You wanted a bit more detail around the values, which is in here, and to add climate change impacts to the list of outcomes. And I've done both of those things. So happy to answer questions, unless you want me to.
Thank you, Rita. We'll open it up for questions from elected members and just check we've still got people online. Tanika, we do. I don't see any. So, Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, I do appreciate that we've had a briefing on that. It was an excellent briefing, by the way. But I just wanted to ask some questions a little more in the public arena, if that was all right. In regards to stormwater, I asked at the time, how does this tie into the three waters? We have current drinking water dealt with, but with the other two, not so much. Is this all still tied into the 2024 deadline in regards to stormwater and that fundamentally being handed over?
Yep, it's all. You can't separate the three waters. We're engaged in a commerce plan at the moment around three waters. This will be part of it. We can't. A lot of the stuff that's mandated in the stormwater in the national policy statement needs to be acted now. You know, we need to be doing stuff now. We can't wait for 3 years' time, 2 years' time. And there's nothing we're doing now in this arena that will be inconsistent with what's going to come out of a national direction or a regional direction. The FI tour is about to start. There'll be nothing that we're doing that is inconsistent with whatever comes out nationally.
Mm-hmm. I'm quite thankful your team does separate the three waters when I turn my drinking tap on. Councillor Halliday.
One of the things that was noticed was a global consent. We're one of the few councils to get one, hence the requirement for the framework. I was just wondering, how come we are one of the few councils that did get one?
That's historic. All TAs now require global discharge consents from regional council. Mm-hmm. It was a bit of a, I suppose, loophole, whatever, in their old regional plan. Technically, they should have been requiring TAs to do it, but they didn't, and we elected to do it, which puts us in good stead actually now, because we have 15 plus years of actual data to base our stuff on, whereas the other TAs are now starting from ground zero.
Great. Sorry, I've just got a few questions here. How are we forming our approach to water responsibility, or at this stage, is it business as usual, or waiting for the process around the resetting of the three waters, or our approach to it? I guess that's all part of what you're saying. It's business as usual up until that point. But I was wondering, I guess on the other side of that, we will still have as a council, through our wellbeing's responsibilities in this space. Are we looking at, I guess it's one of those difficult ones, isn't it?
Our current, in terms of stormwater, our current policy framework is for hydraulic neutrality. So we're already looking after the quantity of water discharged from existing and new developments. The water quality is beginning to become more and more important as well through the regional planning framework, and we're beginning to see Greater Wellington consents requiring treatment on subdivision and development. Okay. This isn't going to change, I don't think, anytime soon. When we have the stormwater management strategy under the new plan, then that will also firm up and give a bit more context around what we're doing.
I guess regardless of the entity, those legislative requirements will still remain. So it is largely business as usual.
That's right, and we still have
the
we still have the water demand management requirements in our plan.
Back to you, Martin.
We're talking about future engagement around 34, 35 and 36 on here. It talks to that we're going to be going back to talk at the markets in May, but we're already halfway through May. I'm assuming that this has actually been pushed out a bit further.
We've aligned our timeframes to the Three Waters discussion. So I think our comms team are going out now for drinking water potable supply, then wastewater is the next off the rank. So we will actually, stormwater starts, I think, beginning of June.
Yep.
So we're coinciding all that stuff to the beginning of June for the first 3 weeks in June.
Cool, that's great. That'll do for me now. Thank you very much.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rita, for this presentation. So I actually just wanted to follow up on your comment about hydraulic neutrality and in terms of how that actually works in the district, whether that covers, I think maybe since 2005, subdivisions are, I don't know whether it's deemed or whether they actually are hydraulically neutral, but how is that monitored and how is that measured?
I suppose it's monitored and measured through the consenting process. So a consent will be granted for a subdivision and they need to tell us how they're going to achieve. That solution will be modelled. And then through that compliance and building stage, we inspect, and at the final sign-off at the 224 stage, then we get confirmation that it's been built as designed. Then when building consents come in, then they need to comply with the requirements of that subdivision. You're right, there probably is a bit of a, disconnect later on because we don't continuously go back and check that that's still operating as designed. But I think that's a lack of resource and yeah.
I might just add, sorry, Mr. Chair. I mean, the infrastructure that's provided, whether that's storage, on-site soakage, we don't have a volumetric monitoring program to go back and check that, but in that it's designed for certain storm events and we know those storm events occur and we're not seeing direct flooding as a result of it, then that, I guess, is a check that does actually work. There may obviously be those designs that were, in 2005, 6, 7, 8, designed around what climate change was projected to be doing for the future. That's obviously changed and increased, so there may be an incremental increase in terms of that discharge off that site resulted with that. But again, they're designed around the looking out to climate change in 100 years. So it is an issue, and as Rita I think mentioned previously, we are currently reviewing that hydraulic neutrality requirement to see how effective that actually is and whether there are other ways that we can achieve similar outcomes in terms of minimising the downstream flood risks.
Thank you, Sean, for that. So a follow-up question. So through the resource consenting process, with the designs that are put in place or are approved, there is no physical connection with the stormwater system, or how does that work? And I suppose, how does that relate, say particularly to some of the larger developments, particularly in the rest home sector? Are they totally hydraulically neutral?
The hydraulic neutrality is that their runoff and volume pre-development isn't sort of exceeded post-development.
Okay.
So they're still allowed to discharge if they have already, or the existing situation exists to the network, then they can do that as long as they're not creating any extra water from the site for those design events.
So hydraulic neutrality is probably, it doesn't reflect probably quite what's happening in reality.
Well,
It is why we're in the process of reviewing and having a look at it, because the term hydraulic neutrality probably doesn't explain necessarily what it actually means.
Okay, thank you.
I was just, neutral in terms of the development as it's developed is neutral in terms of any increased rate of runoff from that site than was there in advance of the development. So there will still be runoff from the site, but it's managed and stored on site, and a particular storm event is used to carry out that design work to provide the scale of storage, or whether, again, if it's soakage and what's likely to be running off the site.
So to clarify, there's no measure in terms of the efficiency of the system, but there is, obviously from a consenting perspective, the checks at the stormwater retention ponds, the rain gardens, and all the other aspects that deliver hydraulic neutrality have been put in place and are adequate.
Yeah, as much as is practically possible, because obviously every rain event has potentially a localised element to it, but technically the scale and size of what's provided meets the modelling and the design criteria that they provide at the time of consent. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. All right, I don't see any further questions. Your Worship, the Mayor, you had indicated you would like to move this. So we're looking at page 424, the recommendations A, A1 and A2, moved by Mayor Guru, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Right of introduction.
Right. Thank you very much. And thank you to the team who have worked on this. This is in response to a revolutionary change that is coming or has already landed. Back in 2017, the government, working with Whanganui EV, had legally given the Whanganui River legal personhood. This is not your general type of thinking. This is Te Ao Māori way of looking at it, that the river and the waterways is a person. What that means is it has got the rights, powers, duties and liabilities of a legal person. This is not your mainstream thinking. This is Te Ao Māori thinking. And this is now part and parcel of Te Mana o Te Wai, which is the key principle, cornerstone of the Freshwater National Policy Statement. You have no choice. Previously, when issues like this came about, the RMA would say, you consider. That has been changed to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai. You have no choice, you have to do this. And if you look at the paragraph 4 on the background, Toa Papa, the sentence there says, increased urbanization of our district and the impacts of climate change are putting pressure on our stormwater network and waterways that we rely to take rainfall to the sea. If you add to that the three important principles of Te Mana o Te Wai, which you can see that in paragraph 8, water has a right. Access to water is a privilege that comes with responsibilities. It's an enabling one. For the first right, while the first right has been delivered, we as humans must live within the limits set by the natural environment to sustain ourselves and then regenerate. We have created damage through our current relationship with water, so we need to take responsibility to invest in regeneration and restoration. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at page 2 of 425, you look at the whole range of other issues, other acts that you interface with. And then the statement in paragraph 11 says this: the Stormwater Management Framework is intended to be the umbrella which links all the specific components of stormwater management together, of which there are quite a few. This is the umbrella network. And for me, the most important thing in this, in terms of giving effect, is a guardianship role through a two-house system in managing this framework. The first time we've had this two-house system management framework, which is a treaty relationship, was with the Whanganui Ōtaki tie, Mountains to the Sea. Councillor Prabhanath would know this because she's part of that. There is a Mana Whenua house, and there's the treaty house, which is mainstream council, regional council. I congratulate staff to have established that framework, because the Te Ao Māori and Te Mana o Te Wai that requires a Māori perspective through which council will engage on a whole range of things. So your growth strategy, the implementation of your growth strategy, implementation of the urban density, all this has got an element where this two-house system sits. My only concern, I suppose it is, that if you look at the paragraph 14 discussion, the vision for the stormwater management Kāpiti, it ends by saying that the council will work in partnership with Tangata Whenua to give expression to Te Mana o Te Wai. We know the perennial problem in this area is unless we increase the capacity of EV to engage, it can't happen, because you need the EV side to have the capacity. To have the capacity to create the capabilities to engage. In the absence of that, there'll be a gray area which can be exploited to maintain business as usual. This is critical simply because if we stuff up the environment, stuff up our waterways, we stuff up our quality of life. And growth strategy is well-being. These are underpinning. So we can think urban intensification, housing, these are critical even for Māori, particularly Māori, we know that. But there needs to be a balance in this issue. I'm looking forward to this as a tool to manage these competing needs. That's why all those who support the intensification need to support this, to allow a balanced view of what life is. It's not just bricks and mortar, it's about building homes. And homes are cradled within environments, sustainable environments. The reason why we have the climate change impact is because we've been alienated from the environmental values. That's a change in thinking. And I also congratulate staff to say, even though there's no legal requirement to consult, we made a decision to do that simply because it needs a change in the mindset. We need to engage with this. And I know there's a lot of what the Maoris call raru in this area in terms of partnerships, co-governance. And next year's general elections, already people are priming up their firepower, if you like, to use that. But as Chris Finlayson, the former treaty negotiations minister, said, it's time to move on. This is a reality, the new reality. We need to move in that direction. And I think the indigenous Te Ao Māori principles of environment being very important, and now, you know, their view that this is, the river, the waterways are alive, have got a right of their own, is a brand new way of thinking for mainstream. And this is one step towards doing that. So I urge you all to support this I know stormwater, when you say that, is not a sexy term, but I tell you what, it's becoming even more so. Politically, it's not a sexy term. People will say, you know, I champion housing. I haven't heard anybody say I champion stormwater.
Well, Sean gets pretty excited about it.
But I like to refer you all finally to a recent front page article in the Dom Post, where the Wellington City Council is taking lead in terms of the greening of your urban waterways, streams, and greening of trees and stuff like that. That's what living is all about. They're doing well in that direction.
Thanks, Manguru. I don't see any other names up on the screen. So with that, I'm not going to give you a right of reply after that long speech. So I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, and that is carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guru. Thanks, Rita.
Well done.
We now move on to page 430, item number 8.6 in the report, which is contracts under delegated authority. And who have we got to hand that over to? Sean, is it you?
Looks like it's me, yep, Mr. Chair.
You certainly don't look like Jane.
After work.
All right, so over to you, Sean.
So the report highlights, I think there's about 4 or 5, actually maybe 5 tenders on here that have been through the process to award over the last month or two. I guess that one of the issues it highlights, so I wasn't going to talk specifically to the paper, but other than the variability in terms of some of the prices that we're seeing coming through, and although you'll see some of them are close to the estimate, some of them are over, some are, I think one may be just on or under. There is a wide range of pricing that's coming through for those tenders, and you'll also see there's a range in terms of the number of tenders we're receiving, from 1 to 2, and in some areas 3 or 4. But the nature of some of that work, the CCTV tender, I think there was a number of tenders for that. So it does show the issues we're dealing with in terms of either price escalation or contractors having enough work to be able to pick and choose what they tender for, and if they do put a tender in, then their pricing can be extremely outside what you might expect in terms of the estimate.
Thanks, Sean. Do you want to just explain maybe how the overs and unders are handled? Because as an example, there's one there that's almost, the contract awarded was almost double the budget, not quite. And so, but then obviously there's some unders elsewhere.
Yeah, so there's, I think the 2 wastewater tenders, there's one that was under, but there's one that was significantly over. So within that activity itself, if it's related to the wastewater activity, we would look at the bottom line for that activity to balance in terms of that differential. There are also, the tender prices also maybe reflect some of that work being carried out in next financial year. I know there was one of them that spans across 2 financial years as well. So there's a combination of both of those to look to manage the price if it is over the budget.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Any other questions from elected members or online? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, paragraph 6, the stormwater asset renewals. There's how do we account for the difference in the 3 tenders ranging from 1.9 million to 3 million? So one of them's 50% larger than the other. How do we account for that sort of significant difference in pricing when it comes to assessing tenders? Because that's quite a big gap between what 2 different firms have obviously bid for the work.
So that will, in terms of that weighted attribute the mechanism for evaluating the tender won't take account of a significant, well, it will in terms of the score that they get ultimately. So generally, I think for some of those pipeline contracts, civil contracts, you might have 50% of the evaluation is related to price. and then 50% is related to non-price attributes. So certainly with a range like that, someone at that the upper end of the $3 million is highly unlikely to be awarded the contract. But in terms of putting the estimate together, I mean, in terms of expecting that you might see a tender to that extreme, I guess, is that again, as I mentioned, the market, some contractors are putting in significantly higher P&G margins on their contracts. So whereas it might be 15% is what you might normally expect, or 12%, that's an area where they might be putting in 25% in terms of risk, or and that can push the prices up significantly. So for a lot of these, the pipeline rates and things like that are generally reasonably similar if it's for a pipeline contract, but it's those elements where they relate to their on-site, off-site overheads and other bits and pieces that are not overly transparent in terms of the tender, that they will put a larger number in, and that's what we're seeing there. You also may see some contractors put in alternative tenders. So for pipeline contracts, you can put in, contractors might put a rate in for drilling or for lining or for some other mechanism to deliver on that contract that will give you a lot lower price, and someone else may put in a more standard contract methodology that is a lot more expensive. I don't know specifically on that one, but Interflow are a lining company, so it may be that there are elements of that contract that they were able to put through that they're using lining for. But again, it's well over the engineer's estimate as well, even the successful tender.
I obviously can't speak specifically of that one, but I do know of instances talking to contractors, and not necessarily for work to KCDC, but they're so busy they throw in a price, and it's like, well, if they want it, they want it, and it's just extra for them. So it's almost like they don't want the work, but they'll put a bid in at the upper end on the off chance that they might get it. So there is instances of that happening as well throughout the sector.
Yeah. And I guess my next question was picking up on the engineer's estimate, where that's 1.2 million, and it's obviously coming over that. Is that essentially down to the sort of construction or infrastructure cost inflation we've seen recently?
Yes. Again, that comes back to what I've mentioned, but the P&G elements and the element of risk associated with that the contractor is prepared to accept and cover themselves in terms of their pricing relative to what the ruling. So the QS quantity surveyor who priced that would be taking those prices straight out of a sort of book value estimate, and they're not always keeping pace with what's happening in the market. Certainly at the moment, things are very volatile in terms of that space.
Cool, perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Quinn. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask a very basic question to start with. Engineer's estimate, is that an internal? I'm assuming that's just an internal person we have here, or do we have engage an engineer to just do an estimate of what we think their costing is going to be?
It would depend. Some of them are done internally, some of them are done externally. Depends on staff availability. Generally, they will be, if it's a design that's been done externally, part of the brief for providing the design will be also to provide an engineer's estimate for the work once they get through that process, so that will come externally.
Cool, okay, thank you. Just a little anomaly here, and I'll use number 6 as an example. 3 tenders received ranging from 1.9 to 3 million, but the contract was awarded for the total of 1,836,000, which is actually under the lowest tender amount. How come?
Once you have a preferred contractor, so you go through that evaluation process, you apply the weighted attribute method, you have a preferred contractor, you're then able to negotiate with that contractor the final contract price. So in some instances, because you have to evaluate all the tenders on their tender as submitted, even though you can see within some of them there may be opportunities to reduce costs by maybe looking at changing some elements to the methodology. You go through that process, then you would negotiate with the successful tenderer, and that's sometimes what you're able to do, is to reduce the price.
Okay, thank you. That
Good question, Martin.
No, that's great. Number 8, professional services for the Ramati seawall. Is that for its design, the design work, designing what's going on there, is it?
Yes. So funding is to get on and design the replacement of that wall.
Cool. And is there, I'm just curious, I don't recall seeing much around the Ramati seawall, but is there a work program around that, or is there some?
Oh, there's a budget allocation over the next, I think it's maybe over 4 or 5 years in terms of the LTP. So once the design's completed, we would then look at how you might stage the construction and then go back to that pricing or the estimate in terms of the LTP budgets.
Cool. I'm not going to go into risks of cost overruns.
Because that one is, I think that's about 4 kilometres, that wall, the upper and lower wall.
Yep.
So it's a significant renewal. So in terms of phasing that and timing, it's been spread over a number of years just to manage the
Curious, I
impact.
remember there was quite a weather event a few years ago. There was a lot of local people that are part of that wall, if you like. They were saying, look, we're quite happy to put some funds in and do things ourselves and stuff, which I know council was a little bit resistant to, or I suppose it's coordinating all that. But are we, I don't know, we're engaging with people that are there in regards to how that seawall is going to be obviously impacting the front of their properties, as such, or is that work to come up?
We will be. That would come through once we've got more of a design on there. There were a number of walls back in 2015, 2017. There were some residents down there that wanted council to contribute. I think that was the shared cost, but primarily they're providing protection for private property along there. It's not the dual one. There are other ones if you further north.
Probably a good question if we have a briefing on that project at some stage to raise around, because there is, having sat around it, there's lots of other factors involved, like Sean said, in terms of neighbouring properties and so forth.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Deputy Holborough?
Yeah, just incidentally, when we have that briefing, it might be good to explain why we're particularly protecting private properties in that area, even though it's not our general policy to do so. I just wanted to ask, the limit on contracts under delegated authority is 2 million, am I right? In terms of the delegation?
Anything over 250,000, and then anything under the chief executive's delegation, which I think is about 2.4 million. But we would generally bring those through, well, they will have to come through as a separate paper anyway for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. It's good to hear that we all have a separate paper on this Raumati seawall. One of the
Could I just clarify, because that was me saying that.
Yes, yeah.
I don't want to mislead you. I'm assuming that when the team get closer to doing that project, they'll probably brief the council on it. I just made that assumption. So whether there'll be a paper or not coming up at some stage, if it's requiring budget for the project.
No, we would brief you in advance of any paper there because of the scale of that work.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify in my mind, it's quite a long stretch of the coastline, but when I've walked along there, there's actually a lot of brand new paths and I suppose construction that has gone along there. Is that actually the same area, or is this a slightly different area?
You'd have to be a bit more specific about where the bits that you've
seen.
I'm happy to.
Can we take that offline, Jocelyn? Just because it's not actually around the specific contract, and I'm just mindful of the time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I don't see any further questions, and we have got the recommendations on page 430. Recommendation A. Deputy Holborough, happy to move. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hanford. Right of introduction.
Oh, just one little point. While it's Congratulate Councillor Coots Day, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Coots for the local content line in each of these contracts for delegated authority. It's something that Councillor Coots has always pushed very strongly for.
Thank you. And so with that, open it up for debate. I don't see any. Aware there are some discussions around the specific contracts that councillors would want to have, but I think it's probably better to have them at the more appropriate time. So I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. That's carried. Now we move on to item number 9.1, which is confirmation of minutes. Anything in there that you've been attributed to that you didn't do, or anything that's not right, raise it now. Otherwise, we'll look for someone to move those minutes. You happy to move, Councillor Compton? Thank you. Seconder for the minutes. Councillor McCann. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. Carried. And if I just flick back to my table of contents, I think we are now going into public exclusion. So moved by His Worship the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Compton, and as we now move into publicly excluded, we'll just get the live streaming off. Thanks for those that have been participating online. Yep. All those in favour say aye. Aye, and against, that's carried.